The United States of America, truly the land of opportunity. In how many other places on Earth can a single family come to join the entire spectrum of the proto-fascist, fascist, post-fascist, neo-fascist, and yes, even super-fascist American right? The Regnery dynasty, without a doubt, is the apotheosis of the promise of this great nation. Today, we will swing through the branches of the Regnery family tree and travel through a century and a half of 100% Americanism. Of course, through the lens of, German Catholic conservative revolutionaries with an on and off again relationship to Nazis. You know what I mean? Americanism. You get it. I'm Fritz McLinden, and this is The State Between Us.
Wenn der Führer says, wie ist der Master Race? Wie Heil, Heil, right in the Führer's face. Not to love the Führer is a great disgrace. So wie Heil, Heil, right in the Führer's face.
That's right, listeners. We are learning about the Regnery family today. Regnery. And there's a lot of them. There's good reason why we're delving so far into them. But I think before I explain that reason, I'm just going to rip this Band-Aid off and give you the cast of Regneries. Just right in the face, right away. So today, we are discussing, in this order, I think, or in an order quite similar to this one, Wilhelm Regnery, William Henry Regnery, Henry Francis Regnery, Alfred S. Regnery, William F. Regnery, and William Henry Regnery II. That is a ton of ruckin' fegneries there. And I challenge anyone to name one other place you can get this many Regneries for free, unless you're one of my treasured patrons, in which case for between $3 and, so on dollars a month. But whether you're freeloading this app or flushing your hard-earned cash right down it, we are in this shit together today. I'm not going to leave you behind. So the family we're talking about today, as I alluded to in the introduction, is sort of a core family in the full spectrum of the American, what we call the conservative right, all the way to what is often called the far right, the neo-Nazi right, the fascist right, all of that. The Regnery family occupies multiple points in these historical networks that we talk about quite a lot. This is also very much a story about how the politics of rule get composed through class struggle. But to be honest, the genealogical weight of this episode kind of limits my ability to sort of walk through the analysis. But it's not that hard. Like, we're going to talk about a very rich, very powerful family, though they didn't start that way, to be fair. But the connections they made, why they made them, how these networks of people, and more importantly, maybe money, come to reflect something like a cohesive, I hesitate to call it an ideological position, but I suppose you have to. So it's just astounding to me that one family can have this much of an impact on a political ideology. And anybody out there truly cashing in on the political moment right now definitely has the Regneries to thank. So, before we delve too deep, let's just review that family again real quick. I'm going to give a little bit of a description, and then we're going to talk about each one in whatever depth they fucking deserve. Or don't. We'll see. So, we're starting with Wilhelm Regnery, whom I like to call Big Willie. He's the original Regnery that made it to the United States, and the dude that started this whole horrible lineage with his son, Billy Hank. That's William Henry Regnery. We're just going to glance at Big Willie. But William Henry Regnery, Billy Hank, was the first Regnery to get his shit together and start making money in the U.S., as well as an early bigwig in the America First movement, the America First Committee of 1940 to 41. His influence and networks are very familiar and very evil, so Billy Hank gives us a nice chance to review early 40s fascism and Americanism, etc. And then from William Henry, from Billy Hank, we get Henry Francis, Hanky Frank. Hanky Frank was Billy Hank's son and the founder of the Regnery publishing dynasty. Hanky Frank, Henry Francis, gives us the American conservative revolution and sets the batshit tone for the Cold War. Alfred S. Regnery, aka Alf, is the only one still alive at the recording of this episode. He is the son of Hanky Frank, Henry Francis Regnery, and the inheritor of Regnery publishing, the Regnery publishing business. And he became an ideological conservator of the movement that his father spent his career assembling. And his Alf's publications give us all sorts of monsters you are sure to know. After that, we've got William F. Regnery, who I like to call Billy Fred. This was old Papa Billy Hank's other son, along with Hanky Frank, but it was just some right-wing businessman. We don't really care about William F. Regnery. We're more interested in his son, William Henry Regnery II, Billy Hank II, our final Regnery today, who died in 2021. He was the son of Billy Fred, the dude that we don't care about, and Billy Hank II is the godfather of the alt-right and brings the outright Nazi shit back into the family. And I'll tell you what I mean by back pretty soon. So I know it's a lot of people, but we got stories to tell about them all. And I think it's worth it. I think it's worth it to know this dynasty intimately. They're not going away. So Big Willie takes us to Billy Hank. Billy Hank has Hanky Frank and Billy Fred. And Hanky Frank begets Alf. And Billy Fred begets Billy Hank too. Yee. I know, it sounds like chaos. It is chaos. But I mean, we're doing it for a reason. Like I said, this one family manages to unite multiple fascistic tendencies, both inside the US and abroad, but more importantly, inexorably links that fascism to the conservative movement as a whole, as well as old friends of the show like the National Association of Manufacturers, NAM, and the Council for National Policy, the CNP. The distance between groups as diverse as like the Vedder eugenicists and Richard Spencer to like Ronald Reagan and William Buckley, the distance is a few chromosomes when we're talking about the Regneries and their effect on political culture in the States. So if you like shit like terrifying genealogies or network sociologies or evolving ideologies, these wheezing geezers are easy pleasers. Chapter 1. Big Willie, the first American Regnery. Wilhelm Regnery immigrated from Ensch, Germany to Sheboygan, Wisconsin in the late 19th century. He had been trained as a cooper, making wine barrels in the old country. In Sheboygan, he married the Prussian Johanna Junk. That's in English, of course, that means her last name is often read Junk, which is why in the family records it's been changed to Jung, which is far more respectable, I guess, than Junk. So he married Joanna Junk in 1876, and they got right to work popping out kids. Side note, Joanna's dad was also named Wilhelm, which maybe is a bit iffy. Different times, I don't know. No judgments. Maybe Wilhelm Regnery was gorgeous. Maybe he was kind and brilliant enough for her to look beyond that weird coincidence that it's her dad's name. The picture of him is up on Patreon right now, on our Patreon, patreon.com/The State Between Us, so you can decide for yourself. Her parents decided that the answer was a hard no. However, they hated this dude. So after they gave birth to their eldest son, William Henry Regnery, that will be our Billy Hank, in 1877, they ditched Wisconsin for Iowa, cow country for corn country, and then finally moving on to Kansas City, Missouri, which I guess is Missouri country. Here is a haiku I wrote for Joanna Junk. My mama hates him just because he's not a good guy. Google Electra. You get it? The same name? I don't know. Look, okay, historically it's not very good. It's like 30 years away from the Electra complex thing, but her name is Jung. You know? Anyway, Wilhelm, Big Willie, brought his family up according to his Nazi great-grandson in a later biography, in a log cabin on the Iowa prairie. Wilhelm way overestimated his farming skills, and Joanna and her fucking million kids, including their eldest, William Henry, Billy Hank, watched him fail over and over again. The Blong family took pity on him and gave Wilhelm the chance to get by with some unskilled mason and plaster labor. Joanna and Wilhelm lost 2 children in these years, and the stonecutter misspelled the name on one of their headstones. In St. Louis, Iowa, Wilhelm raised his children to love Germany, which would make the 30s and 40s very interesting for them. The farming village he grew up in still exists today, and that same Nazi grandson claims that the area still maintains its German heritage and the exchange of property stays within the neighborhood. The Germans in Iowa were strongly socialist at the end of the 19th century, and Wilhelm's son, William Henry, is sometimes said to have spent at least part of his youth as a socialist, though in that kind of loosey-goosey form of Georgism. But that whole, I was a socialist until I wised up line is a powerful one in the Regnery family historical messaging, so that could also just be bullshit. In the last decade of the 19th century, Wilhelm moved his family on to Kansas City. Little Billy Henry worked in some store there, and it was around that time that Wilhelm's wife fell ill and died, and Wilhelm's health and spirit quickly collapsed. Big Willie would never tell his grandchildren about Kansas City, preferring instead to reminisce about farm life in Iowa, which, if you'll recall, fucking sucked for Wilhelm. So I think that tells us something about his life in Kansas City. So I know I've painted a portrait of a massive loser here, quite a pathetic figure. So pathetic that, I would say an empathetic figure. But Wilhelm's son paints him differently. He paints him as a highly literate and cultured person. To me, this feels a bit rose-colored, but what do I know? It's not like fasci types tend to have gut-wrenching daddy issues, right? Right? Wilhelm's son, Billy Hank, that is William Henry, ends up working for a German named William Volker, who filled Billy Hank's gaping father-shaped hole in his life, as well as hooking him up with a good income. Volker was a very rich man, and is known in Kansas City history as a great philanthropist, because he was also extremely anti-welfare and wanted to prove that point by elite largesse. His role in Kansas City history is pretty interesting and more influential on American political culture than I'd have guessed. Volker was at war with the Pendergast machine, which ran the city and the Democratic Party at the start of the 20th century. Volker thought that his money would drill into this machine and allow an enlightened government of gentlemen to take over. But Pendergast brought the guns, and after double-digit deaths and a failed election campaign, Volker threw in the towel. The experience left him with a disdain for government and a belief that it reflects the will of the morally unfit. As his health would later fail him in the 1930s, Volker would give his estate, including his Volker Fund and publishing outlet, to his nephew, a guy named Harold W. Lunau, from where Harry would discover Hitler stands like David Leslie Hagen and libertarian monsters like Murray Rothbard, who would make names for themselves on his staff, as well as we will see soon within this sort of Regnery circle. But that's another terrible branch of this tree. We can just, we'll just watch it twist off into the sky away from view, promising future episode content. We've got our own branches to worry about today. Let's get back to fucking Wilhelm's son, Billy Hank, though. He's the key here. In 1902, Wilhelm Volker ships Billy Hank off to Chicago to help manage a textile coating firm he owned there. Hank's work there, if he did anything most of us would call work, apparently pleased Volker, who offered him a 1/3 stake in the enterprise. By 1912, Hank was the majority shareholder of the business and was in full control of it. The Regneries were finally rich. Billy Hank met his wife, Frances Thrasher, at the Volker Company. Her father was a Union soldier, and her uncle was a Confederate soldier during the Civil War. They bought a nice house in the Hinsdale suburb of Chicago, where they popped out 4 kids between 1904 and 1912. The first was named William F. Regnery. I don't know what the F stood for. I've tried like hell to figure it out, but it remains elusive to me. I do know there are some Freds in the Regnery scene in Chicago, though, so my guess is that it was like a Friedrich or a Frederick or something like that. It's not Francis, because his brother was a Francis, so let's call him Billy Fred. Billy Fred will become the patriarch of the alt-right branches on our family tree, whereas his little brother, born in 1912, Henry Francis Regnery, a.k.a. Hanky Frank, will become the patriarch of the sort of new right and conservative revolution branches. 10 years after Hanky Frank was born, after Henry Francis was born here, Wilhelm Regnery died in Kansas City. We will first focus on Billy Hank, that is William Henry Regnery, because we fucking gotta. But since I already talked about the auspicious birth of his sons, our 2 brothers, Hanky Frank and Billy Fred, who, like Romulus and Remus, you see, would suck at the wolf teat of capitalism until they came of age to defend it from us. Let us pause and review just the family line thus far before dangling off these branches here, just to sort of get the fucking genealogy straight. And then I'll tell you what it all means. Okay, so Wilhelm comes to Wisconsin from Ensch, Germany, where he fails to figure his shit out. He marries Johanna Junk, and they move to Iowa, where he continues to scrape and hustle while he and Joanna crank out a bushel of children. First among them being William Henry Regnery, our Billy Hank. He finally moves them all to Kansas City, where Joanna dies. Billy Hank meets Wilhelm Volker. Like his mother, Billy Hank was clearly attracted to people with his father's name, and becomes like a son to Volker, who makes him rich. Volker's other son-like figure was Henry Lunau, who helped create the basis for American libertarianism, and that's kind of a fictive brother to Billy Hank as well. Unable to meet a good woman named Wilhelm, Billy Hank settles for one named Frances Thrasher, who he meets in Chicago, where he owns a house in the suburbs. Their first son is named William F. Regnery, who I'm calling Billy Fred, and their third is Henry Francis Regnery, who gets stuck with the name Hanky Frank in this episode. Billy Fred takes us to the alt-right, Hanky Frank takes us to the new right. You got it? I know you don't. It's okay. I'm still getting it. But don't worry, this is just chapter 1. We're just introducing the characters. Let's start to get to know them in chapter 2. Billy Hank, the America First Regnery. O.G. Patrick Bateman, a man named Robert Douglas Stewart Jr., Robbie Dougie Stew, founded the American First movement in Dad's Quaker Oats properties with a bunch of other young Batemans from Yale. They caught the eye of a retired general and Sears Roebuck chairman, Robert E. Wood, who is just begging for his own episode about his long fasci career. And Bob thought the America First Committee was super, because he had turned on the New Deal for its social welfare program, as well as FDR's backseat alliance with the UK against the Nazis. This is during Lend-Lease. So Bob Wood hit up his buddy, William Henry Regnery, our Billy Hank, to bankroll the thing. And Billy readily became America First's original and principal backer. Billy Hank was a member of Robert Wood's incredibly creepy Chicago Boys Club of America, and they were both big boys in the National Association of Manufacturers. They were Nammons. And who else would join Wood and Regnery to establish the Kansas City chapter of the American First Committee back in Missouri? None other than Billy Hank's brother from another mother and father, Wilhelm Volker's nephew Harry Lunau. So that means that on November 20th, 1940, in the Hotel Mühlebach in downtown Kansas City, you had this fucking luncheon that featured the national commander of the American Legion, future president of the National Association of Manufacturers, and failed coup financier of the business plot, Robert E. Wood, You had the literal grandfather of both the New Right and the Alt-Right, which is Billy Hank Regnery, and the guy who would soon help mainstream, early on, both Holocaust denial and American libertarianism, which is this fucker Harry Lunau. They're all there together in November 20th, 1940. So for those who are kind of new to America First, let me just break it down in brief, and we'll use Billy Hank as a nice refresher in that historical moment. America First started in autumn of 1940 by, like I said, a bunch of these Batemans and Namans, and was ostensibly an anti-war organization, though careful to note that they were not pacifist. They advocated shoring up U.S. domestic defenses and ignoring the war against the fascists in Europe, in part because it implied an alliance with the commies, and in part because its founders, not all of them, but enough of them, were massively sympathetic to Germany. The movement was hugely popular, attracting tens of thousands of critics of FDR, of the New Deal, and of the Second World War. When America First became lousy with German-American boonsters, silver shirts, Nazi spies, and other fucking fascists, it was Billy Regnery's buddy, General Robert E. Wood, who refused to do anything to stop them, despite receiving multiple entreaties begging him to do so, officially from chapters of the America First Committee. He fucking ignored all of them, leaving those efforts up to local chapters to handle. So some of them had some kind of anti-fascist sort of defense mechanisms, others didn't. Finally, Charles Lucky Lindbergh gives a pretty decisive speech in September 11th, 1941, basically settling the issue of whether or not America First is kind of fascy by blaming the Jews and the British for making him an anti-Semite. Everybody heard that one. It was public, fucking radio broadcasts and everything. So it didn't do great for America First's image or their numbers. Lucky Lindy, Charles Lindbergh, I'm sure you guys remember this dude. He's the one that flew across the Atlantic, and he also lost a child to mysterious circumstances. He was also one of those guys who was sort of a prototypical Musk type, like had a lot of kids, didn't take care of them. It was mostly important that his genetical code was out there in the world so that someday, it could create Übermenschen. And Lindy was tight with like Goering and shit like that. That's Lindy. Lindy had been nursing a bro crush on the handsome Lawrence Dennis, probably the only smart fascist in the history of the world, who began his career as a black child preacher in the South, peaked in his career as a white-passing, openly fascist intellectual and Wall Street prophet, and ended his career as persona non grata in post-war America, both racially doxxed and politically forgotten. Dennis also had a close relationship with Robert E. Wood, as well as Billy Hank Regnery, who was an important patron for Dennis while he was on trial and essentially funded his late life as he was in decline. So we're talking the absolute cutting edge of Euro-facing American fascism when we're talking about Lawrence Dennis. Not necessarily in the sense of theory or new ideas, because fascism has neither of these things, but in the framing of the story for networks of powerful people that could give it momentum in the U.S. context. That's what Lawrence Dennis brought here. Lawrence's story overall is fucking unreal. I very much recommend Gerald Horne's 2006 biography of him, The Color of Fascism, Lawrence Dennis, Racial Passing, and the Rise of Right-Wing Extremism in the United States. I just think he's fucking interesting. And he was apparently the adult ward of Billy Hank Regnery here, William Henry. Anyway, to calm the seas, and to show that America First was not just some anti-Semitic, Nazi dick-riding bunch of fascists, Wood and Regnery booked Clarence Mannion, an out-and-out Francoist, to rant something anti-communist and almost certainly anti-Semitic to the whole country for the December conference. But unfortunately for them, that is, of course, December of 1941, when the Japanese air attack on Pearl Harbor spoiled the whole party. Even the Chicago hardliners knew it was time to shut it down. Billy Hank Regnery picked up the tab again for the debts the America First Committee as a whole had incurred during their latest campaign, and he hooked his old buddy, Bob Wood, up with a fat stack as well for his next projects. Some of those we're going to talk about in later episodes, but just know that Regnery money is behind a lot of the people that are going to end up as topics on this show. During its brief but inglorious history, Billy Frank was the treasurer of the National America First Committee, remained on its founding board throughout, and I think offered legal counsel as well in his role as a lawyer. Regnery would also give funding to Mervyn K. Hart and his National Economic Council, whose previous benefactor was none other than NAM's own Howard Pew of Sunoco Oil, Sun Oil. Hart's National Economic Council was the anti-Semitic, anti-communist think tank that figured out the fabulous magical mix of Francoist fascism and libertarianism while always maintaining a laser focus on open class warfare. He was responsible for the original right-wing political action committee and, like many fascists, helped himself to the catalog of left organizing tactics to keep fascism alive in mainstream conservatism, which was, to be fair, in its very infancy. Both Hart and Clarence Mannion would become bigwigs in the NAM-backed John Birch Society led by Robert Welch. And I'm sorry to stretch your brain out even further, but do recall that it is from the John Birch Society that we end up eventually with the Council for National Policy in the early 1980s. Merwin K. Hart's work in a great many ways prefigures the JBS, and it adds that missing piece to episode 3 on the prehistory of the Council for National Policy, which picks up the mantle of NAM's war on democracy, socialism, labor rights, and basically just the struggle to be a normal, decent human being, and it carries that war on all those things still today. It's because of this lineage that Cold War-era Red Scare films, like John Wayne's Big Jim McClain,
obituary, name so-and-so, age such and such, okay,
spend a fair bit of time explaining how democracy is our Achilles heel in the fight against communism, but in the most ironically self-incriminating ways possible.
There are a lot of wonderful things written into our Constitution that were meant for honest, decent citizens. I resent the fact that it can be used and abused by the very people that want to destroy it.
A lot of that, this isn't a direct connection, but Mervyn K. Hart gave a lot of the narrative support for these kind of Cold War era films. Democracy is the problem. Democracy is exactly that thing that will bring in socialist slavery of all the fucking whatever rich people. So, this is all just to say that Billy Hank Regnery, William Henry Regnery, has a long reach already. He's working at the very roots of Americanist, anti-communist fascism. I mean, I think it's very fair to call it that. In fact, it might be generous to call it that. A lot of these people will claim that they are to the right of fascists, but we will get there. And just to sort of close out America First as a topic, for those who don't know, the original America First organization was called America First Incorporated, and it was started by a Klan-affiliated Nazi-simping psycho named James True, who sold policemen's truncheons he called, Jew killers, but with a more racist word. He sold these to Klansmen, to boonsters, silver shirts, etc., to prepare for the coming race war. And after the America First Committee fell victim to Japanese imperialism, the next America First after the America First Committee, which again was after America First Inc., was a political party run by Gerald L.K. Smith. Remember that guy? He was the claned up psycho that I mentioned in our Christ for All Nations episode. Do you remember that dude? Remember that guy? Remember this guy?
The baby having, stump grubbing, sod busting, go to meeting, God fearing American people are about to take over the United States government of America.
Yeah, that guy carried the fucking America First brand after the committee. Again, you might know the Nick Fuentes has his own American First thing. but I'm pretty sure he's into the fashy-cathy elements of the original 1940 committee overall. Anyway, it's all a very fitting history for a stupid fucking idea. As Nazi Germany collapsed, so did Billy Hank Regnery's health. By 1947, he was no longer able to travel, and he died finally in 1954, just when the movement that he helped start was getting its second wind. So that was Billy Hank. Let's talk about the Rugrats, the Runts. Let's talk about his kids. I've got little to nothing on Billy Fred, on William F. Regnery, so we'll wait till we get to his own kid to discuss him. Right now, we're going to focus on the man who created the Regnery publishing dynasty and essentially William F. Buckley Jr., a guy that I like to call Hanky Frank. Chapter 3, Hanky Frank and Alf, the Regnery First Americans. Henry Francis Regnery liked to talk about his dinky little publishing office when he first started his business at the end of World War II. He would say it was above a Walgreens to prove how unbelievably low he began his rags to riches story. He wasn't handed everything on a silver platter, you see. He had to work his way to the top by taking on a lowly upper management position in Daddy's company. I mean, if anything, it was a platinum platter. Get your fucking facts straight. But you see, Hank here had his eyes set on something more. He wanted to rise above being a lowly textile magnate's son and enter the glamorous world of plausibly deniable fascist publishing. But he'd really have to roll up his frilly sleeves and get at it. I mean, Dad would only give him a few $100,000 in 1940s money? What is that, $1 billion? In 1944, Hank Regnery joined the news and commentary outlet Human Events, a magazine that would much later become central to the Nixon-era political right. Originally founded by Frank C. Hannigan and Felix Morley, it began as a non-interventionist magazine with an eclectic approach to the U.S. political spectrum. Within a year, they decided to bring in Henry Francis Regnery, which would prove to be Morley's death knell on the editorial board, as Morley, a Quaker, would soon quit in principle, as old right ideas about isolationism gave way to new anti-communist imperialisms. Regnery was probably able to throw his weight against the magazine founder, Morley, since Regnery had brought in the funding of a number of American firsters and NAM types, including Lucky Lindy, General Robert E. Wood, Joseph Pew 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 of Sun Oil, and it's actually Pew Jr. of Sun Oil, and of course, his own dear old dad, Billy Hank. Back in the mid-40s, Henry was mostly focused on calling FDR a communist and decrying the treatment of the Germans. Hanky Frank, you see, was sent as a youth to study in Germany during Hitler's rise to power. And basically it started when he got there. And he had once commented on being unable to recall any anti-Semitism of note at the time. Okay, buddy.
Okay.
Human Events' first few years failed to bring in more than 5,000 readers total, which is just as well because in those years, Human Events danced at the edge of Holocaust denial and promoted the Pearl Harbor was a false flag conspiracy. It also, in part, presided over the transition from the isolationist old right into the Cold War conservative revolutionaries that presaged the new right. Regnery and his staff pushed the idea that the demand for total surrender of the German state was worse, this is what he said, was worse than anything Hitler did during his rule. And Henry Francis Regnery himself raised food aid from his readership, claiming this is food aid for Germans during his readership, which, okay, you can, I'm not gonna, okay, you raise food aid, but maybe don't claim, as he did, that it was for, quote, those who will be responsible for carrying on European civilization. That's not subtle. But as far as Nazism goes, it is plausibly deniable. Regnery mastered that game as publisher and writer, and the multitude of conservative movement and new right all-stars that will tumble out of Regnery publishing over the following decades is a testament to that and will carry it on as well. Henry Regnery founds the Henry Regnery Company, in 1947. This will grow into Regnery publishing. Regnery's topically scattershot and increasingly conspiratorial list of publications and human events put him in conflict with his remaining editors. Hanky Frank, was feeling cramped. So he finally decided to ditch the editorial board entirely and launch his own thing. With the Henry Regnery Company, he initially dedicated himself to publishing books by authors who would revitalize the spirit of America first. Not so much the anti-war bits, but definitely the fasci bits. For instance, in 1950, he published America's Second Crusade by William Henry Chamberlain, which argued the conspiracy theory that FDR manufactured World War II and that the Nazis were, in their heart of hearts, a democratic movement. And that is what started the whole fucking mess somehow. Chamberlain is, of course, well remembered among Holocaust deniers at the Institute of Historical Review today, the group that wormed Holocaust denial into the absolute fringe of the Overton window, but they did make it in. The Regnery Company must also be held responsible for creating the John Birch Society in a sort of roundabout way, not in this more direct NAMI way, but they were very much, this is the same fucking people. I doubt you're surprised by this. Probably at this point, you're absolutely not surprised. But Henry Regnery was quick to publish some of the early works of Robert Welch in the early 1950s. I think he published 2 works in that time. And in fact, the Regnery Company was the publisher that put out the very biography about the man John Birch himself, the missionary, which inspired Welch to adopt the name for his National Association of Manufacturers-backed ecumenical club of religious zealots, ultra-rich batemans, and political power players, the JBS. Outpacing Welch's or Chamberlain's works, and as well as another book that would come a little later called Russell Kirk's The Conservative Mind, just dwarfing all of these as far as influence goes. Henry Frank's real big break came with his discovery of a 20-something-year-old William F. Buckley Jr. and his book God and Man at Yale in 1951.
Got a sort of a fascist situation.
He recognized a fellow self-made man, you see, a rough-and-tumble type with nothing but $23,000 of his daddy's money to publish and promote his book. This, by the way, became the model for conservative publishing moving forward. So if you ever wonder sort of how that works, apparently Regnery Publishing helped set that practice of authors essentially paying for their own books to be published and Regnery Company doing the distribution, etc. But this is what I read. I don't know how up to date this is, but it is apparently practice in conservative publishing to put up a lot of the funding for your own book. It's a rich kid's club. Buckley had other financial links to Regnery that I don't entirely understand, but had to do with lending some Regnery associates some money for some oil interests. I don't know. I'm just saying that this is all fucking rich kid passing money around fucking shit. The book itself, God and Man at Yale, is very doxy. So this fucking dweeb, Buckley, essentially uses this book to sell out a bunch of professors and students and stuff like that, and calls for a new commitment to a very National Association of Manufacturers style big tent Christianity under which both Jews and Catholics will be respected, and more importantly, also diehard commitments to the individualist principles of the free market will be respected. The principles that harken back to Nam and Billy Hank's close relationship to Austrian school libertarians. It's sneakily trying to make, in Billy Buck's typically cowardly, indirect way, Keynesianism into a backdoor to communism, continuing the America First belief that the New Deal would lead to some 1,000-year Judeo-Bolshevik Rooseveltian Reich/Soviet, but in a subtle tone, a tone that Robert Welch and the JBS would never really be able to figure out how to adopt. Buckley is the thinking man's psycho. It's impossible not to read God and Man at Yale without at least trying a stupid voice, right? We gotta try.
If the alumni wish secular and collective influences to prevail at Yale, that is the privilege. What is more, if that is what they want, they need bestir themselves very little. The task has been done for them. There remains only a mopping-up operation to eliminate the few outspoken and influential figures who stand in the way of real unity in Yale's intellectual drive towards agnosticism and collectivism.
I mean, imagine being at Yale and thinking, God damn, this place is communist. This dude's fucking crazy. So Buckley's family has genteel slaveholding origins, and his dad would become the primary funder of a white citizens council publication in the desegregation struggle. They're a Texas family. That's why he has that fucking, obviously I can't do a Buckley. Okay, I tried. It didn't work out. It's a weird mix of like that kind of extinct northeastern Atlantic accent that's vaguely English-ish mixed with a sort of genteel Texan accent, which, I spent a lot of my life in Texas. That accent wasn't part of my area. Like it's an unusual way of speaking he has. But, that's because his family comes from these fucking genteel slaveholding origins, right? So both Big Buck, Dad Buck, and Little Buck would support either materially or in print the overtly claned up Dixiecrat States' Rights Party, whose platform read like this. We stand for the segregation of the races and the racial integrity of each race, the constitutional right to choose one's associates, to accept private employment without governmental interference, and to earn one's living in any lawful way. We oppose the elimination of segregation, the repeal of miscegenation statutes, the control of private employment by federal bureaucrats called up by the misnamed Civil Rights Program. We favor home rule, local self-government, and a minimum interference with individual rights. Unlike Big Buck, Buck Jr., the smooth-talking William F. Buckley, was also a straight-up fucking CIA asset who, at the time Regnery was publishing God and Man at Yale, was actively engaged in counter-revolutionary propaganda in Mexico City among students there. He would take them on in friendly sparring matches of debate and pass around an essay that he himself had translated from Spanish to English and from English to Spanish again, an essay from a commie defector from Chile. The first translation was for the CIA to read it. The second one was for the CIA-approved version to make it back into the hands of Spanish readers at the universities. I have to say, it's hard for me not to get a little excited about the idea that Buckley, working for the CIA, essentially prefigured Turning Point USA. According to his biographer, in the recently released book, Buckley, what's a full title? Buckley, The Life and Revolution That Changed America. That's the author is Tanenhaus. So according to that book, Buckley also had his little mitts in the Chilean coup, eventually bringing Pinochet into power, and knew literally everything that was going on during the fucking Watergate scandal. He was up to the fucking minute because of his close association with Howard Hunt, this fucking CIA dude, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, this is a future, probably series of episodes, but it's no longer an exaggeration to suggest that Billy Buck Jr.'s creation of the conservative revolution and its multi-decade campaign against democracy and socialism was very likely an extension of his work for the CIA. I mean, of course, by conservative revolution here, I'm referring to the American one, not the German one of German Catholics, which I'm sure in no way inspired this one. I mean, it did. Spoiler alert. I really want to spend more time with Sam Tanenhaus's Buckley, Life and Revolution That Changed America in the future, but it's a fucking 1,000-page text, so we shall see. Def worth the time, though, for my own selective sojourn into its pages for this ep, though. But anyway, Henry Regnery made that fucker. He also put up the funding for the creation of Buckley's most lasting contribution to American conservatism, the fully neo-Nazi-linked National Review, which served as a messaging whip for Buckley's counter-revolution, built from homegrown American fascism, integrated with the pre-church committee CIA, but carefully tone-policed and capable of charming normies into positions that were not only fascist because of their ideological or political characters, but that were fully embedded in the very human and personal networks that make up the meat space of American fascism itself. I mean, imagine being William F. fucking Buckley Jr. and just straight up telling Americans that democracy is stupid while being hailed simultaneously as the vanguard of American values.
What I would do is vote to lift the standards of the vote so as to disqualify 65% of the white people who are presently voting.
The dude was fucking amazing. That guy was amazing. What a fucking crazy gig he had. And thank you very much, Henry Regnery, for all of that. So I mentioned that Hank Francis's dad, Billy Hank Regnery, was tight with that Lunau guy. That was, the nephew of Volker. And that guy helped discover Murray Rothbard. Well, it was Hank Francis Regnery, the son of Billy Hank, that gave Murray Rothbard his big break in the 1960s. And that was almost certainly in connection to Murray catching the eye of the Volker Fund back then, run by Papa Billy Hank's brother from another mother there, Harry Lunau. I'd like to think that Hanky Frank called him Uncle Hair Bear, but I don't know. I'm not going to get into the libertarian angles so much just yet, but if you aren't pals with Murray Rothbard, let it suffice to say that he was a member of the Mont Pelerin Society as a young nerd and would go on to found the Cato Institute, the von Mises Institute, and the Center for Libertarian Studies. He also really loved David Duke. He was best friends with the Holocaust denier while being a Jewish man the whole time. In fact, Human Events, despite its unquestionably anti-Semitic origins and general guiding ideology, regularly featured Jewish writers whose often well-meaning or even progressive critiques of things like state power or Stalinism or Zionist nationalism or the actual mistreatment of locals by Allied occupiers in occupied territories, etc. All of these things would be reframed by Regnery into a mythological base suggesting Kabbalistic conspiracies, or somehow exposing the inherent weaknesses of democracy. These Jewish writers were foils for him, behind whom he could safely stab out at his carefully chosen targets. Indeed, Human Events debuted with the publication of a socialist Jewish author who didn't care for how German civilians were being treated by Allied forces after the surrender, and he wrote kind of a generalized essay against violence and abusiveness during a transitional period. There was no way this guy knew he was contributing to Hanky Frank's mythos. Regnery was just the only guy that would publish it. He also put out German Jewish conservative revolutionary and ultra-elitist Hans Rothel's hugely popular text, The German Opposition to Hitler, in which he argues that only a conservative ruling class of hyper-elites can stop the type of lowbrow populism from sullying the reputation of German nationalism. This guy, Hans Rothels, initially supported Hitler and attempted to acquire honorary Aryan status there, but the Gestapo hadn't gotten the message, so he switched sides to the other German fascists, the conservative revolutionaries and those types. And I say fascists intentionally, but these guys would have seen themselves, to be fair, to the right of the fascists. The fascists were a bit too populist, a bit too democratic, you see. Henry Francis Regnery's company published these works as alongside works by reactionary poet T.S. Eliot, and of course the professional propagandist for Mussolini himself and rabid defender of racial segregation in the U.S., Ezra Pound. He eventually split the company in 1977, with one half becoming Contemporary Books and the other becoming Regnery Gateway Incorporated, changing finally to Regnery Publishing Incorporated, which he later passed on to his son, Alfred, before finally dying in 1996. So that was Henry Francis Regnery. So we've got Billy Hank, William Henry Regnery, America First. His son, Henry Francis Regnery, becomes publishing magnate, making books that are to the right of the Nazis, and also making Alfred Regnery. So let's chat a little about Alf.
Although conservatism as we know it today is a relatively new movement, it really only emerged on the scene after World War II and only became a political force in the 1960s. It is based on ideas that are old as Western civilization. The basic tenets of conservatism, the philosophical or intellectual foundations on which this movement has been built, stretch back to antiquity, were further developed during the Middle Ages in the 18th and 19th centuries in England, and ultimately formulated into a coherent political philosophy at the time of the founding of the United States. In fact, in a real sense, conservatism is Western civilization.
That's Alf Regnery, very much his father's son. Alf continued the Regnery publishing empire, becoming a stalwart advocate of the conservative movement and the authors that made it. He came about it honestly, having failed spectacularly to enter politics in a meaningful way in the 1970s, during which he resorted to inventing a fake story about an assault and rape on his own wife to garner law and order sympathies when he ran for district fucking attorney for Madison, Wisconsin in 1976. Ironically, because he would later help Ronald Reagan, produce the anti-porn Mies report. When the cops did go to his house in 76, they did not find any evidence of any assault nor rape, but they did find an enormous amount of pornography. Womp womp. So yeah, I said Alf served in Reagan's government. Not just in this porn thing. He unfortunately got to go full Heinlein and shifted the focus of the U.S. Justice Department into going after kids in 1983. Awesome. So having clearly gone at that point as far as he was gonna go in politics, and with literally zero life skills of any kind, Daddy gave him the family publishing business. Today, in late life, Alf is seen as the chronicler of the movement, speaking at places like the Citadel, the military college in South Carolina, originally built to defend whites against slave rebellions. And here he is, actually, teaching a bunch of officers in the making what's what, as an honored speaker in a lecture series on conservatism just a couple years ago.
Order means a systematic and harmonious arrangement, both within one's own character and in the state of the Commonwealth. It signifies the performance of certain duties and the enjoyment of certain rights in a community, such as used in the phrase, the civil social order. Order is necessary for life and the pursuit of our dreams, and is perhaps more easily understood by looking at its opposite, disorder. A disordered existence is a confused and miserable existence. If a society falls into general disorder, many of its members will cease to exist at all. And if the members of a society are disordered in spirit, the outward order of society cannot endure.
In this decade, Regnery has been responsible for such hits as Conspiracy Theorists, O'Neill and Corsi's Unfit for Command, the fucking Swift Boat book about John Kerry. He's also published In Defense of Internment, The Case for Racial Profiling in World War II and the War on Terror by Michelle Malkin. He published The Reactionary Mind, Why Conservative Isn't Enough, a more recent book by Michael Warren Davis. I'm pretty sure it was Alf that put out Ernst Junger's Peace as well, continuing Dad's commitment to the conservative revolution. There's actually a more recent text, a very recent text from Alf's publishing empire, Regnery Publishing. It's either called The History of European Conservatism or The History of the European Conservative. Either way, in this book, that very same ultra-right, super-fascist German tradition is overtly linked to the Regnery-built American tradition. They're all in this one book. It's a translation of a French author, but this is their fucking outlet, you know. The same book is also rightfully clear about the Spenglerian historical basis at the root of this thought, which is something to consider every time you hear these American conservatives use the phrase the decline of the West. Neither is the book shy about the infamous Nazi jurist Carl Schmitt's influence. And if it wasn't clear enough how very comfortably the American conservative revolution fit inside the European movement, fear not. The entire American movement is included within this book as part of the European tradition. There you go. From Spengler to Buckley, baby. That's the Regneries. Alfred Regnery was also, of course, the publisher of American Spectator magazine between 2003 and 2012, and has served on the board of Salem Communications since 1993, which owns it and many other properties. Also, just talking about Salem, in April of this year, Salem Communications, that is Regnery's, he's on the board of this company, they signed a major stock deal with who? Donald Trump Jr. and Lara Trump, which saw Salem Media taking a third ownership over a mobile news aggregation app co-owned by Donald Trump Jr., called MXM. Salem Communications co-founder, a guy named Edward G. Atzinger III, is a member of the Council for National Policy, our dear old CNP. Alf Regnery is still out there living large, sitting on the board of the Conservative Action Project, itself a very active arm of the CNP, which promoted the election conspiracy leading up to January 6th. So that was William Henry Regnery and Little Alfie. These are the conservative Regneries. Now let's talk about the fascist Regneries. Chapter 3. Billy Hank II. The Alt-America Regnery First 2.
This time it's haircut.
Billy Fred, the least well-known male Regnery. We don't know anything about the many Regnery women, by the way. But Billy Fred Regnery and his wife Elizabeth Britton had little William Henry Regnery II, Billy Hank II, in 1941. A year before, Hanky Frank had little Alf, the whole publishing side of the family. Billy Hank II was plopped into the University of Pennsylvania when he came of age, but he washed out and went to join the Barry Goldwater campaign. Without a degree in hand, Dad got him a job at the family textile firm, but he fucked that up too, and he lost enough money for the family to give him the boot. His dad apparently very openly hated him and talked shit about him all the time. He lasted a little less than a year and a half at this fucking textile firm. His own namesake, Uncle Hank Regnery, wouldn't even hook him up at Regnery Publishing. Billy Hank II spent about a half century being pointless and rejected by his family, the ultimate conservative dynasty. Totally coincidentally, I'm sure, Billy Hank grew disillusioned with the conservative movement. He saw Uncle Henry Francis and his disgraced politician cousin Alfred as having betrayed the right by supporting Israel, getting into overseas interventions, and interestingly enough, supporting free markets. He wasn't a big fan. He was also very racist in the exact wrong way. Despite having connections to American neo-Nazi groups, Klansmen, and actual Nazis and their surviving supporters, the Regnery-Buckley alliance had revived that whole thing to fit the narrative-making mythology needed for the Cold War, and Billy Hank II didn't get the memo that Buckley had once sent Robert Welch and Willis Carto. They didn't get it either. And where the fuck are they now, you see? So, between 1999 and 2000, the not very spry Billy II pulled together a European dozen of white nationalists who were all down for the Balkanization of America, in which a, quote, proper home for white Americans could be founded. It included such bright lights as American Renaissance's Jared Taylor. It included Kevin McDonald, the racist pseudoscientist that would later be Anders Breivik's biggest fan, and Peter Brimlow of the eugenicist Vidare, that's VDARE group, whose work is enjoyed by current White House Deputy Chief of Staff and National Security Advisor Stephen Miller. As this group matured, this little Euro dozen, Billy Hank II named it the Charles Martel Society, after the 8th century Frankish bro in the Battle of Tours, which Regnery of course interprets as white Europeans defending the race against dysgenic hordes of, scientists and philosophers and mathematicians who wanted to teach Europeans how to clean their poopy buttholes and maybe think about some sewage or something. That might be my interpretation. I don't know. I mean, who wants any of that, right? Charles Martel saved Europe from the Islamic Golden Age. Thank you. Great, Charlie. Well done. The Charles Martel Society put out the very Nazi periodical, The Occidental Quarterly, which was initially edited by a dude that his cousin had booted from Human Events. For associate editor, he brought on the so-called philosopher king of the racist right, Sam Francis, who was very publicly fired from the Washington Times for being a straight-up basset hound-faced fascist. It's starting to feel a bit like Peter Pan around here. There's like an island of misfit boys growing on little Billy Hank II's side of the family. In 2005, in a sad attempt to replicate the careers of the conservative movement he so resented, Billy made his own DC think tank, good for him, called the National Policy Institute. He's like a big boy now, at fucking, 70 years old or something. This is the National Policy Institute's self-description.
The National Policy Institute is a Washington, D.C.-based research foundation that educates the public on trends and policies which affect the interests of the United States' historic majority population. The NPI seeks to elevate the consciousness of whites, ensure our biological and cultural continuity, and protect our civil rights. The Institute will investigate issues of interest to the white community. It will study the consequences of the ongoing influx that non-Western populations pose to our national identity. NPI is guided in its work by the wisdom and vision of the founders, whose purpose was to establish a more perfect union for the benefit of ourselves and our posterity.
He also found his own little Buckley-like guy to run it, a haircut with a data plan named Richard Spencer. NPI started with about $600,000. About half of that was coming from the Charles Martel Society, and it looks like the rest of it was coming from Billy Hank II's family textile concern, which, by the way, has been called Western Shade this whole time. Western Shade. Amazing. The National Policy Institute's first publication in the winter of its first year was a press release calling for the mass deportation of all undocumented migrants. Now, for you young'uns out there, back then, way back then, that was something of a fringe position still, you see. So when Regnery met Dickie Spencer, Richard Spencer was writing for the American Conservative magazine, which was co-founded by Pat Buchanan, who we really need to talk about at some point, in 2002, to offer a more paleoconservative, isolationist right opposition to the neocons behind Bush the Minor. Incidentally, this was the magazine that made J.D. Vance a big name back in 2016. Loudly echoing Bill Buckley, Spencer came from a genteel slave-owning stock. Familiar. And he was making a name for himself at a very young age in all the right, literary and political circles. Very familiar. BuzzFeed writes,
Spencer seemed everything Regnery wasn't. Academically successful, publicity hungry, and youthful. The two men hit it off.
At that time, Regnery set up some little group called the Academy of Philosophy and Letters, together with his Jewish friend Paul Gottfried, Mises Institute scholar and the U.S. correspondent to the French fascist eugenist magazine Nouvelle École. Spencer was part of this thing that I think was their sad attempt to make some sort of Buckley-esque normie narratives that would cover their Nazi asses, but they couldn't mumble their way through the rabid obsession with race, so they alienated themselves from their own club. 3 of them, because of this, went off to make a new club called the Mencken Club. That's the 3 of them being Gottfried, Spencer, and Regnery. So it was at the Mencken Club, named after H.L. Mencken, who was also super anti-Semitic and kind of a fash, and had, very conservative revolutionary type guy. So this terrible trio, Spencer, Regnery, and Gottfried, actually coined the term alternative right there at the Mencken Club. Alt-right was born there. Spencer says he came up with it when trying to come up with a title for a speech by Gottfried. Gottfried said everybody came up with it. Spencer made the infamous alt-right website called Alternative Right sometime shortly after. When Regnery asked Spencer to find someone to run his National Policy Institute, Dick nominated himself. So that's how Richard Spencer became our problem. Another great win for the fucking Regneries.
It's Pepe's become kind of a symbol.
All of this was too much for cousin Alfie, Alf Regnery, who advocated his fucking cousin's dismissal from the Board of Intercollegiate Studies Institute, co-founded by Bill Buckley, which, since 1953, to this day, continues Buckley's CIA work in Mexico by promoting conservatism on campuses. Billy Hank's own fucking cousin stabbed him in the back in the most rich kid way humanly possible. Billy, you're off the board. As Unite the Right was coming together, BuzzFeed gives us a nice image of what Billy II's setup in Florida looked like in 2017.
Nestled on a calm island just a mile across, connected by a toll bridge to the west coast of Florida, the town of 1,700 is an enclave of understated wealth for old money families, including the Bushes, the DuPonts, and the Steinbrenners. Palm trees line the medians on Gilchrist Avenue, right near the Gulf, and residents tool around in golf carts. The median home price is $1.3 million.
Much like Trump, it really seems like poor Billy sought the company of these classic NAM types who always saw him as a loser. He embodied that sort of Pareto image of the out elite, the frustrated out elite, the perfect little fascist in the making, except that he was like almost dead. After Unite the Right, and despite Richard Spencer becoming persona non grata on campuses around the U.S., beginning with the University of Gainesville, Florida, by the way, which we'll talk about this month, Bill Regnery II looked back with pride on this whole period. He saw Trump as the ultimate validation. With Trump's rise, he saw a connection between the Unite the Right rally and the rise of Trump. Trump, he saw as the ultimate validation of what he had created, of what Regnery had created, embracing Trump even more than his stuck-up conservative family on the other side, who saw Trump as like a tactical boon but not a true believer. Billy Hank, too, saw Trump as the creator of a whole new permission structure for white nationalism. I think we can just say they're both right. So, in our next episode, we'll get back to Ricky Dickey Spencer when we are graced with the presence of one of the people who helped organize the battle against him in Gainesville only a couple months after the deadly Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville back in 2017. Today, I wanted to go camping, I guess, in the old hunting grounds of the Regnery dynasty and its fail sons. Its fail son's fail son can wait till next week. So in the end, I guess I'm left with some questions that I still have open. And if someone listening out there has some answers for me, well, do let me know. But one of the things that I didn't really have time to emphasize, I just sort of mentioned, was that this whole line is very Catholic. Like the spaces around Robert E. Wood, the spaces around Buckley, this entire Regnery family. I mentioned the Mervyn K. Hart and Francoism. Like, there is this strongly Catholic background to it. And I like this because, I appreciate that fact because it does fill in a gap that has been, I felt, present since the CNP episode, which was, what was the mechanism by which these very evangelical, very Protestant, very traditionally anti-Catholic groups of people, when they got politicized, I've been kind of missing the connective tissue between more of these older, kind of more conservative, very Catholic parts of the CNP. And this brings that together. I mean, it's now clearer how these things fit together. But it makes me wonder, actually, how much influence things like the conservative revolutionary movement in Germany during the 30s had on American conservatism. I think that's an interesting open question still. And I think, there is some thoughts that I have about referring to the conservative movement in America as fascist. Now, I think that is a legitimate use of that term for a couple reasons. One of them is that, you hang out with Nazis, you're a fucking Nazi. Like, I don't care that much. Fuck you. The other thing, though, is that it is fair to argue that these people might also be considered to the right of fascism, but I have a bit of a problem with that. One of them is that it kind of accepts fascism's own understanding of its populism in a way that I'm not comfortable with. But also, let's keep in mind that these are Americans. Like, we call them old money in America, but they're not old money in like a world historical sense. A lot of them are new money. Sure, I mean, some of them go all the way back to like fucking New Amsterdam, but, most of them don't, right? And the Regneries definitely don't. So they might have pretenses towards a sort of old European conservative revolution, but they don't have the fucking cattle. They're all hat in that respect. It's just not here. So I think structurally they default to fascism, whether or not they have a choice in that matter. And I also would say, it's easily explicable just by saying like fascism had no truck anymore after the Second World War in the US. So, hence you get books like The German Conservative Opposition to Fascism, which is about people that consider themselves to the right of Hitler. So I think, yeah, fuck them. They're fascists, not just because fuck them, but also because I doubt that they really had the material basis to be a properly reactionary conservative group. Like, they are still in the States, after all. And I'm very interested in, and this is something that I actually will be getting to very soon. I am interested in the post-church committee era. How much of these sort of conservative revolutionary goons stuck around in the CIA? Like, okay, we know the Bushes did, but the Bushes and these groups are very antagonistic at times. Sometimes less, but very often quite antagonistic. So how many of these people moved into the CIA, and how many of them moved on to things like the Council for National Policy's Western Goals group? That's where we get into John Singlaub and things like that. I think these are some open questions that I still have from this story, but I have to say, the fact that it's one family that is opening these questions up is pretty impressive. It's worth noting, and I guess fearing a little bit. So until we truly end this story with a discussion with a comrade who fought against this line in the form of Richard Spencer trying to do the old Buckley thing at campus, until then, I think we'll leave it there. So if you want to see a very recent case study in what Regnery thought looks like today when it's sort of pressed a little bit from outside its own tight circles of self-publishing fucking megalomaniac rich kids, you can watch, I mean, I would never recommend this show under normal circumstances, the Ezra Klein show just a couple days ago interviewed the author of The Virtue of Nationalism, a man named Joran Hazoin. And this is the founder of the, I think, National Conservatism movement of conservatism. I don't know. I mean, it's whatever. But just fucking listen to it if you want. It's long, but it is sort of up-to-date Regnery thought. This dude was published by Regnery. His work is clearly inspired by the works that came through Regnery publishing. So you can check that out if you can suffer through Ezra, but if not, you don't need to look very far to find more. These people are fucking everywhere. Jack Posobiec, I don't think I mentioned this, but he ended up becoming the editor of Human Events at some point in his fucking career. It might even still be true today, actually. I'm not really sure if that's up to date, but I mean, these, as these guys. And it's really obvious that there isn't much of a difference between what people call the quote-unquote extreme right and the mainstream conservative right. And I think if you don't get that by now in the Trump era, you're probably not going to get it ever. So I might even just stop bringing it up. I mean, it's evident. Here we are. So I know following a bunch of white people who have practically the same name and did practically the same things, it's tough. I thank you for your attention. I thank you for getting this far. And if you want to see where this continues, please check out patreon.com/thestatebetweenus for more episodes on this topic, as well as some opportunities to get involved in our Patreon program. So that's that, as William F. Buckley would say.
Got a sort of a fascist situation.
We got a sort of fascist situation, people. We got it.
Got a sort of a fascist situation.
We got to do something about it. It's not cool. All right, later.